Live from New York, it's Saturday
Welcome to Makeover Montage. I am your co-host, Marie Lodi, a fashion and beauty writer.
I'm your other co-host, Blair Bursey, Hot Mess Express, and having a good time today.
Yes, we are having a really great time with our special guest. Everybody, get ready because we have costume designer Tom Broecker here. He is a longtime costume designer for Saturday Night Live. He also did the new Mean Girls movie, which I had the pleasure of talking to him for Fashionista. He's done 30 Rock, so much more. I cannot wait to get into it. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thank you.
So before we just pick your brain about everything, can you tell us like a little bit about your background and how you became to be a costume designer?
It's sort of a long story, but I'll make it short story or I think coming to be a costume designer, and this is what there's so many parents who are like, well, how can my child get into this business and how can he become a costume designer? And I think when I started off, I didn't actually really know that there was a job as a costume designer. And that wasn't really, it didn't seem like it was a thing. So, or design was something more in line with doing theater. And so I grew up in the theater and and I was I was a dancer for a while, but those were sort of secondary, I'll say, because my family are very professionals. They're professionals. And so I don't think, although the arts were important, I don't think it was a viable way to make a living when I was growing up, or there was a thought that it wasn't a viable sort of way to make a living. And so I wanted to be a child psychiatrist. So that was sort of where my emphasis and all of my sort of academia was sort of moving itself towards. And then I eventually discovered, after being in a lab for a while, that really wasn't going to be a viable existence for me. I needed to be sort of engaged with people and not petri dishes, and I needed to be around things. And now the joke is sort of, well, I'm still a child psychiatrist because I work with actors and I just tell them what to wear as opposed to like trying to help them with most of their issues. But as you know, I mean, the psychology of costume designers is a very big aspect of being a costume designer. And so I came to New York. I was a Juilliard, and then I went to the Yale School of Drama, and then came back to New York and just sort of started working all the time.
And here you are.
And here I am, however many years later, still carrying bags.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you're right. There is so much psychology that goes behind, costume design, trying to get into these characters' heads and figuring out like what they'll wear, how they'll express themselves through their clothing. I feel right. Just like normal people, we do that every day. So
100%. And that's the thing, that's one of the things I love to talk about too, just sort of in general. It's like, I think as a regular person, say, versus an actor, we tend not to think about the psychology of ourselves very often as we're getting dressed and how we're reflecting our own lives onto the world, and we open the door and we're showing the world a part of ourselves by how we dress. And so with actors, we do that for them, like we're helping them develop the character. We're saying, oh, wait, this is how you would dress as an actor, this particular character going to get coffee. But as a real person, you have that as well, but you probably aren't necessarily cognizant of really actually doing that for yourself. Because you just sort of like, this is what I wear. I'm just going to put on my sweatpants and my Uggs and get in the car and just do the drive-through and not engage. But you're also telling the world something about yourself when they look at you while that barista is handing you your coffee. They're making judgments about you. They're seeing some sort of visual storytelling that you are storytelling about your own life. The costume designer just but the costume designer gets hired to help the actor and the director make those decisions and help in that decision
And
making.
that's our favorite.
Mhm.
We love when we can take a still frame and look at it and begin to kind of assume certain things before watching a project, because it's so every little thing is there. Are the shoes scuffed or are they new out of the box? Is the shirt a Macy's shirt or is it a Bergdorf shirt? Like you can start to begin to piece stuff together, and it's so exciting.
Yeah. And that's what ultimately I think, going back to my career and how I sort of led myself into that sort of stuff, was that costume design was something that ultimately combined everything I loved into one job. It's not at a desk. It's dealing with people. You have to know anthropology. You have to know history. You have to know textures. You have to know clothing. You have to know people. And then also how to visually represent all of that information into one thing. And so, you sort of do it for yourself, but then the costume designers, like you were saying, well, where does this person shop? Does this person shop at, this place or that place? And also, is that sneaker new, or is that sneaker old? Or how do you make that sneaker look like that person's had that sneaker for a while, or any of that sort of stuff? It's all supposed to be a representative of that character.
Yeah. That's what excites me.
And then you have the text, which is hopefully informing you in terms of storytelling and all of that sort of stuff. So
love it. This is why we love costume design. So many.
I know,
parts.
exactly. It's and 100%. And I think, to your credit, as people who talk about this is, I think, what is really super important about helping people understand what the importance of the costume designer is, because I do think there's a little bit of an element still of, well, it's just shopping, right? You just go and do this. It's not,
It's more.
You know what I mean? That you see, oh, well, in the production design and that sort of stuff, people are afraid of, because they think they don't know how to do that. Whereas costume design, people think they know how to do it because everybody has to put on clothes in the morning. So by the mere fact that we have to engage our bodies and put on the clothes that are in our closet that we have chosen, people think that they can do that job.
Which is crazy. That's like saying I take Advil, so I'm a doctor. That you
100%. Exactly. I deposit my checks into my bank. So I would be a banker.
And we love talking about the reason why things don't look the same. So we love to talk about, if we watch a show and somebody has a t-shirt that we know is a t-shirt that's readily available to, everyday people. Right. Why does it look different on this person? And it's because it's been pinned, it's been tailored. It might have been altered in a way that you don't even think about, like pushing the shoulders up or adding a shoulder pad. It creates a whole new kind of personality ecosystem for a shirt that we all feel like, oh, well, I can get that at the store. And it's so smart.
Correct. Yeah. And one of the great things I think too about really good costume design, or I don't know, but sometimes you sit there and you'll watch a show and you have no idea why. Like, you're like, this just looks amazing. And you're not necessarily picking it apart or any of that sort of stuff. It's just such a cohesive whole that it just is so organic and everything just feels right, that you really then can just push into the language of the program you're watching and the visual, and it's just so great. Speaking of t-shirts, the beef is a perfect example of that, the journey of a t-shirt. That chef, that guy, Jeremy, it is all about a t-shirt.
Just a plain old white t-shirt.
A plain white t-shirt and a blue apron. And hearing, I know Christina, and so just hearing Christina talk about that journey and that journey to get that white t-shirt and to hear like where it was altered and how it was altered and just the quarter inch above the thing. And she's even said, well, you can look, this is where we got it. And this is the t-shirt. But then when we put it on the actor, this is what we ended up having to do. So that's why you put it on, it's not going to look the same.
Also, the quality of the material, you think it's just regular old cotton. It's not. Correct. It's also really expensive. Like, what is it? It costs a lot to look this cheap or whatever the saying is. Like, it costs
both. I think it's both. I think it costs a lot of money to look a lot of money, and it also can look a lot of money and be really cheap. So yeah. But that's what one of the things I always say too is that you can take something that is inexpensive and make it look amazing by having a great tailor.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yes, I've tailored Fashion Nova.
100%. No, but it's like I've taken. I used to make the joke. I take an Ann Taylor skirt I bought at the Salvation Army and make it look like a Prada skirt. Mm-hmm. Like with the right tailor, you can make anything look amazing.
I'm sure you have all the inside scoop for New York tailors. If you have any LA
have a couple
ones
in my back pocket.
Oh, okay. Shall we get into SNL? We've got a lot of questions about that. Sure. Okay, so I guess...
So what?
So you've been the costume designer for SNL since 1994, but you've worked on the show before that, long before that too. So we're curious, because this is so different from, I think, a lot of the other interviews that we've had or like a lot of the costume designers that we've had on the show where we're talking about one specific movie or whatever, but this is like a million different characters like every week. So can you give us a little bit
I know
like how that works, from time you get the script to like, woof, it must, no wonder you drank all the coffee.
I know, exactly. Well, it is funny too, because we're getting ready for the 50th anniversary. And so talking about characters and just sort of starting to realize, oh yeah, there have been a lot of characters over the last 30 years that I've been here that we've helped shape and mold and had the audience respond to and such. How the show works now. I mean, it didn't always work like this over the course of the 30 years. The show has changed in the way it works. We just produce a lot more now, and the videos are a lot more, and so all of that stuff has led to how we do the show differently now. But for the most part, the overarching week is still pretty much the same, which is we get scripts on Wednesday. So we go into a read through around 4:00, and then there's usually anywhere between 37 and 42 scripts. And we read at a table and everybody reads them and all that sort of stuff. So there's a reality, you can hear the laughs. And from there, the producers and the writers go into a meeting and sort of distill the show down to about 15 sketches. And those will be the cold open. If the cold opening hasn't been written, they'll talk about possibilities. They'll talk about the film pieces that they want to do. And just sort of get the overall feeling of what the show is going to be. And then from there, after that show has been created with those 15 sketches, it sort of is like everybody scatters to their areas so that they can talk to each writer and actor performer comes to talk to the different departments so that they can help start to realize what their particular sketch should look like. So in different areas, they have the production design area and the props area, and that's where they sort of divide into two. So half the group comes to the hair, wardrobe, makeup, special effects people, and the other half go into the production design people, and then they switch. And so that's the first time where we really kind of start to get to the nitty gritty about, okay, so let's talk about what your wig looks like. Let's talk about what your clothes look like. Sometimes in the script, as in all scripts, the writers will either put a little picture of inspiration that they're thinking for the particular character, or they'll write a description as to what they think. I have found, and one of the things, having been here for so long and talking with a bunch of comedy writers, there are sort of two types of comedy writers. There's comedy writers who are very visual in the way they write. Like Tina Fey is very visual in the way she writes. She sees in her mind how she sees the comedy working in relationship to the close. And then there are other people who don't write so visually and don't sometimes understand what they have written on the page and how myself as the costume designer is supposed to reflect that. And so that's when the questioning starts to, bless you, the questioning starts to come into play there. Well, you wrote this. Is this really what you mean? Do you really mean that this person comes in a clown costume, and why is that person coming in a clown costume in the middle of the coffee shop? So, and sometimes it's just like, well, we just put a bunch of funny words together, and that's sort of what we wanted. And it doesn't really mean that, and this is what it really means, and all that sort of stuff. So that meeting usually takes about an hour and a half, and then so now it's about 11 o'clock at night, and so 11 o'clock Wednesday night, and we start really kind of going back and re-breaking this show down. And then my staff all comes in on Thursday. And we have a big meeting Thursday around 9, and just sort of to dissect everything and give everybody their tasks to do and what they're in charge of, and all that. And then it sort of is like off to the races until Saturday at 11:30. And, while we're doing the live show and the film unit sort of operates on parallel universes. And so we're sort of, Thursday is the parallel universe where we're all trying to get the film unit stuff done. And because the films are usually shot either Thursday night, Friday, and then if they're not doing some of them Thursday night, then they'll do them Friday, all day Friday. So basically from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., 11 p.m. on Friday.
I have a question about that, because just knowing production, knowing how it works, and knowing that, like, if you do have a segment with a clown, you have to test the shoes. The set is super small. I know on TV everything looks big. So it's like you can't put somebody, let's just use Dakota. You can't put Dakota Johnson in clown shoes and ask her to walk around a small set if she's supposed to. So how do you parallel these extremely high quality music video sketches at the same time you're also supposed to be making sure that your celebrity guests can walk in clown shoes? How do you do two?
The beauty of Saturday Night Live is we've hired really amazing people to work here. And the people who work here, I know I always use the hashtag line, best team ever, but it truly is. We do have the best people here, and everyone's been here for a while, and so everyone operates on like a different plane here, and so your mind just has to work so much faster. So because you've come to train yourself not to have that time and that luxury of time, so you have to operate in just like, okay, if I don't have this, then I had to pivot here. If I don't have this by this time, then we have to do this and that and that. One thing that happened last week, which was sort of funny, is that I don't think anyone really understood how tall Jacob was. He's 6'5". And so it was really funny because by the time the show on Saturday, we were doing not the dress rehearsal, but the rehearsal before the dress rehearsal. And all of a sudden, people started realizing when he was in frame next to other people that there was a very big space between where his face was and the next face. And so all of a sudden, we had to start adjusting some things. So like, oh my God, can we put this person next to him in platform shoes? Do we have any shoes to make this person taller? And Bowen was really funny because Bowen did something on his Instagram last week, and we did have these shoes made a very, very, very long time ago that we had made for Dana Carvey for George Bush to make him taller at one point, and they're probably 8.5-inch platform shoes. And so that was one way. We also did crazy stacked heels, platform boots and all of that sort of stuff. They also did some apple boxing and all that sort of stuff. So I think you won't see a lot of people moving in those Jacob sketches from last week, or you won't see, you'll see from a lot of thigh up. You don't see much otherwise.
As a long-term watcher, never even thought about that. And now that you're saying that, yeah, he has a Herman Munster-esque height difference compared to everybody else. And like, I could see a writer being like, yo, every time he walks into frame, the first thing you're going to want to say as a comedy writer is, geez, you're tall, but we're supposed to be doing a normal sketch. That shouldn't be the first thing. I didn't even think about that. That's bravo to everybody.
Well, and we had now into that sketch, and they did sort of write a sketch about that, which was the Short King sketch.
Short King,
and exactly. And so that was a little call out to it. But then at one point they were like, well, but can we make Mikey taller? You know, because he's the same height as all the Short Kings. And I'm like, well, we can do that, but then visually you have to pull back, and then all of this stuff was happening there was all this physicality between Chloe and Jacob, and then you didn't want to get that in the way of then all of a sudden seeing this person in the corner in like 8-inch platform shoes, and it became very restrictive in that sort of stuff. So we had to sort of compromise here or there in terms of sometimes like, well, what is more important to figure out how to get the person up, or where are we willing to compromise?
Okay. I have a question about the, like, kind of when a skit or doesn't require like a costume. Do the cast members, like, I'm just thinking of like Sarah with her, because she has such an iconic, her style, which I love.
Yes, exactly. It's clown, clown fashion.
Yes. So like, is there any costumes in that? Do they wear, like, I'm assuming that's all her stuff.
So it is there's always the, not difficulty, but there's always the area of where to enhance the person's aesthetic, and really push into it or push away from it, or particularly if they're just playing, oh, she's the girl coming in to get a coffee and she has a line and then she walks out. And so what is that? And sometimes we do push into that because it can easily be like, it could be Sarah or a version of Sarah or that sort of stuff. Or sometimes it's like, well, no, let's make this a completely different person, and this person would be like this, and this. It sort of depends on the writer, the actor, and the situation. I think it's important sometimes on this show to make sure the audience is connecting with the actor, because unlike a sitcom, you're playing the same person the whole time. And so you get to see that person playing that character over and over and over. Whereas this, you see a person play multiple different characters. And so there's a questioning sometimes of like, oh, wait, is that person or is that person? Which person do I like? And is that funny or is that not funny? And so I think it's very important in the very beginning part of their careers at Saturday Night Live is to really make sure that they are connecting on some level visually and with the show and through their self characters, who they are. So we as audience members begin to like them.
That makes sense.
I love Sarah's look. It's so fun.
Oh, she's great. She's like, yes. Sometimes the hard part is like, no, you're not playing.
You're like,
it's towing the line. And also I say sometimes, you can do your look. Our fashion designers who are doing this look. So you don't necessarily always have to push into vintage. You can push into contemporary clothing and allow that to be informative in your look as well.
So you had
fashion
mentioned...
is a very big...
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, that sounded like a good line.
I was just going to say, fashion is the thing that's interesting about fashion in the end is that fashion includes a lot of different things. And you may not necessarily, Armani might not speak to you, but Bodhi might speak to you. And they're both contemporary and they're both doing the fashion. And so, like all things, you find your, your tribe to help speak you.
Mm-hmm. But you had, you're talking about how the 50th anniversary is coming up and there's been just so many different characters. So the one, like the most memorable, iconic recurring characters I can just think of like over the years, Mary Catherine Gallagher, Stefon, just those delicious dish, like all those people. So, and like Lisa from Temecula, right? I'm just thinking of like where we can always instantly recognize from their costumes. And also they end up becoming like Halloween costumes, So those ones.
Correct.
Yeah. So how do you work with the actors? Like you mentioned, it can go either way when they're writing, but how can you give us an example of like, any that you might have helped with or how they put the look together?
Right. So we've of course, we've helped with all of them, and sometimes they have a kernel of the character in their audition, but they haven't realized it, or it's a very, I don't really want to call it this, but it's a very janky version of whatever they, because they, they did it and they had to go to the Salvation Army. And, put something together. And so it's not fully realized and not, let's say, television ready. So in helping that way and helping them develop the character, you have to, I don't want to say give them what they want, but they are the person performing that character. So you have to make sure that they are comfortable in it and they can figure it out. And, two things, you mentioned Mary Catherine Gallagher, and then I was going to talk about the Cheerleaders as just sort of two different versions of a way of working it. But like with Molly and Mary Catherine, it was sort of like, okay, well, what color schoolgirl costume do you want? Because Catholic schoolgirls are sort of, these are the three versions of Catholic schoolgirl colors, if in terms of uniforms. And so we pick that. And then, do you want it to be the jumper version? Do you want it to be the blouse version? Do you want a cardigan? Do you not want anything? And so, you have to start dissecting that. And then she had a pair of shoes that she originally had worn. And part of it was also, going back to your thing about shoes, the shoes were very important because she had to do all of this movement and she had to be able to jump and kick and all of this sort of stuff. So the shoes became very, very important to that. And the first, and then eventually we had to say to her at some point, you need to wear padding. Yeah. Like, just to protect yourself, because she would go into these trances and that's what was so beautiful about watching her do this is she would just go over to it and she would allow her to inhabit her entire body and her entire being. And she would literally finish the sketch and not realize that her entire back was black and blue and had just like literally just from throwing herself down on the ground and such. And so eventually we had to just be like, and sort of adjust the costume a little bit to accommodate padding, because we didn't want to get her, she was starting to hurt herself sometimes. And so, so we had to make a little adjustment in that way. But, that was working very specifically with her to get her all the things and to get the color she wanted and all that. And I remember sitting in the fitting and sort of going, okay, well, how about, and what I thought was an appropriate length for that skirt. And she just kept going, nope, higher, nope.
You're
higher,
like,
nope,
you are
higher,
where you're
nope,
going to
higher.
jump and kick.
I was like, I was like, okay, then we have to then make sure your underwear very specific, because we're going to see
and
your
it can't
underwear.
look like an accident.
Yeah.
And also in that sort of, exactly. And in that way, in that sort of moment, I have to also rely on the actor to be okay with however high or much skin or any of that sort of stuff, because they're the ones who are ultimately going to be out there. I don't want to force them into anything that they're not going to feel comfortable in. And so, and so that's how we developed Mary Catherine. Like with the Cheerleaders, part of the thing with the Cheerleaders was, they wrote the sketch and now it's Thursday morning and most cheerleader costumes are custom made. So that became, there was at that time it was the mid 90s, I think. And so there were one or two places where you could call and get cheerleader costumes with blanks on them and sort of wholesale. And one was in Texas and one was in California, I think. And so, that was another one where we had three options. It was just sort of like, okay, well, what are the options that we have on this Thursday, because we need them tomorrow, which is Friday, because you had to FedEx them out to us, and we have to be able to get them again, because sometimes we don't know if the sketch is going to hit or not, and we don't know if the sketch is going to become a recurring character. So sometimes you make a costume not realizing it's going to then become iconic and a recurring character, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, that, Ed Hardy t-shirt that Stefon wears that we had to go in and sort of color a few places because of standards and the issues, the copyright issues in the graphics that Ed Hardy has and all that sort of stuff. So there's certain things we had to go in the first time Bill did it and change some of that artwork.
That's so funny, because I know you look at that like, Bill, we would have done this differently had we known this was going to be years long character, beloved, that was going to probably would not have done it this way. But you don't think about those. Well, the viewer doesn't think about those.
No,
you're just like
no. And then also there's the thing with the actor too, is that the actor, if it does hit, the actor tends not to want to change it. Like they get superstitious.
Oh.
Correct. And so they're all of a sudden, they don't want to change it. So it has to stay the same. Now, there are certain characters which inherent in what they do and who they are, change, like Donatella Versace. And, that was a character that had to change every time we saw her. There were a few other characters who were like that. Lisa was one of those. Lisa, her first, the second time she changed her outfit, and and those are discussions we have with the actor as to why they would want to do that, or if there's a really what is the reason, and it's basically if they have a good reason to do it and it makes sense to the character and it makes sense to the situation, then we sort of go into it and so say, okay, I agree with you, so let's try it this way. And if for some reason it doesn't work, we can always go back to the original.
I have a quick just fandom question, because I'm hoping somebody else cares as much as I do. For characters that you're not going to necessarily see the bottom half of that much, like for Stefon, for example, we know he's sliding in, we know he's going to be sitting a lot of the time. What does that bottom half look? I don't think I've ever thought about what Stefon shoots.
That's a really great question, because and then sometimes, as you were saying, it becomes a Halloween costume, and then you're like, right. So then, and then sometimes it's like, oh wait, he's standing up this time. We've never seen him, like all of a sudden he's walking out in front of the desk. What is he going to be wearing? And so, yes, and so sometimes then it's a question. Sometimes then we engage that conversation. Then when we actually see it, sometimes it's they're wearing the bottom half to the next sketch they're in. Like particularly if it's on update, like if they're behind the desk and we don't see them, a lot of times they'll be wearing the bottom half of their next costume. So then they don't have to change the bottom half of their costume when they leave, and they're ready then for the next one.
I just imagine
it is the whole changing of the costume sometimes is very, in the early days, I used to, and I didn't know this, but if you kind of start looking, but in talking with the original costume people and wardrobe people about it, but the four guys never wanted to change bottoms. So they would wear the same black pants for the entire show and just change upper halves.
That's hilarious. I get it.
So if you look at unless it was a really specific character, like I think Bill on all of his characters always had, for the most part, a different bottom, like, Lisa Lubner's, all of those sort of things. But for the most part, I know Chevy and Dan and Belushi never changed their bottoms. They all would just have a pair of black pants.
That's such an improv thing too, where you're just like, quickly run off, put a coat and a top hat on, and now you're somebody else.
Correct. Well, and also in those old days, you would play Gerald Ford with a mustache, or
oh, gosh.
Or Nixon with a mustache, or it's like now Anderson Cooper is with, we give him blue contacts to make his eyes bluer. So there is the evolution, because technology allows you to keep changing and growing and all of that sort of stuff.
Oh, boy. I can't imagine all of the changes, along with hair and makeup. I just realized, the beginning of last week this week, when Jimmy Fallon came out, I feel like he had on the Gibb beard and everything. Like he had to run out and do his moment in the cold and then come back out with... I didn't even think about that, but boy.
Yeah, and so that becomes a big, and that goes back to a little bit about how do you make sure you're giving that person their identity as a self, as Sarah as herself, versus say Sarah as the character and that sort of stuff, because they do on our show play characters, and so they're hidden a lot behind makeup and hair and prosthetics and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's a lot.
Now all I can think of are the sketches with blood and things moving around. I'm like, oh geez, oh Lord.
Yes, yeah. There's always the ones with the blood and the vomit,
food,
special effects
and smashing,
food.
And then, to your point, they get in the zone, and you can tell when things go too far because the next character is getting, icing whipped onto them, and it's unexpected. You're like, oh, it's fun for the viewer, but I know backstage they're like,
yes, for the
please
viewer,
don't mess up her hair. She has to go into the next sketch.
Yes, exactly. It is sometimes you're like, all right, so now we have to strip her face completely clean. And she, sometimes for the next, or he or she, for the next scene, will barely have any makeup on. Yeah.
I just have a question from last night's episode with Dakota. The Stanley Cup skit. Did you make those shoes?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Was that you, or was that props?
That was It was It theoretically, I guess normally it would be a prop. I was like, is this going to be a prop, or is this going to be us, or? And we work really closely with our prop people, and so we work with a group of guys they're called the Monkey Boys, and they do a lot of the specialty props. But this one in particular, we did it with our makeup artist. So who, this seems really random and weird, but last year or the year before, he bought a 3D printer for the show. So now the show has a 3D printer. So in talking with my assistant, Ashley, we were talking and we were like, okay, this is, I think Louis can 3D print the Stanley Cup, and then we can, finagle it and all that sort of stuff. And so he was able to take the boot and the cup. We drew the picture, explained how really it needed to be done, and then he molded it and did all this. And then eventually we couldn't decide whether we were going to then 3D print the whole thing, like have the cup be then the boot as well, or whether it should just stay the cup and the boot, so you could read it, faster, that the Stanley Cup was the back part of the boot. But yeah, that was 3D printed.
Wow.
That was really funny. So good.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the episode that you are nominated for CDG Award. That is the one hosted by our queen, Aubrey Plaza.
I know, she is.
Obsessed.
Bow down to her. She is just amazing. Yeah.
So let's break down some of those skits, starting with, of course, the Avatar one. Can you tell us how you brought that one to life?
So here's how. So it was super interesting to go through this process, because ultimately what the inspiration that I think came from this was, something that happened. Steve Higgins is the voice, and he's one of the producers, and he works on the Tonight Show as on
and
our,
his son
next
is on the show now, right? Okay.
And his son is,
there was a moment this week where I was like, "Ooh, we're bringing that up."
Oh yeah, so it was a big, beautiful moment yesterday, and the PDD thing I thought was really, it was such a beautiful, hilarious sketch. Yes, last night. But so I guess they were down there, and all of a sudden, someone in their control room hit a switch, and in hitting this switch, made everything on TV flip itself, and so all of the skin turned blue.
Yeah.
And it was just some weird thing. The guy had no idea what happened. He had no idea what to do. And then that became sort of, well, on the Tonight Show, they flipped a switch and everyone's face turned blue. So that became the whole, like, this is what we have. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. Well, we had no idea. Our team and everybody didn't really know, and then talking to them, because it was just a completely fluke thing that happened down there. So ultimately what we found was, working with the video editors and that sort of stuff, was they were going to adjust some of the color dials in order for all the coloring to sort of work itself out. What then we found was that the only way to really do this was to we first were like, well, there's no way we can paint everyone head to toe in blue Avatar makeup, and also then do the show at all unless everybody's in blue Avatar makeup for the entire show, because you couldn't get them off or any of that sort of stuff. So it truly became, how could we even manage to do this at all? So what they ended up finding is that, everybody was carrying around the color wheel for the entire week of how to flip all of the colors, because that's ultimately how they figured that was the only way they were going to be able to get the truest blue, is if, in order for the skin tone to be orange or some sort of really the opposite of blue, so they could make everything. So ultimately we had to make everything orange. So in person, everything had to be the reverse of what you think it would be. And then, so when it became on screen, by what they were doing in the control room, they were adjusting everything to make it blue.
Wow.
So at the very end of that sketch, you can see when they pull out that everybody is in orange unitards, all hand painted to do the Avatar stuff. All of the Avatar, there was a big stuff about Avatar and all the design of Avatar. And so we were looking at Ashley was looking at all the way in which the macrame things were happening and all the feathers. Well, she had to paint all of the same sort of thing. All of the feathers, all the strings, everything had to be reverse painted. Mm-hmm. So in order for it to read like it did in the movie. Mm-hmm. So it was a crazy, weird sort of mind-bending exercise for 2 days.
Wow.
And you would think, oh, wait, here it is. And then you're like, oh, wait, no. Now I have to reverse everything of that.
Damn,
man!
So it was pretty spectacular, and then when it worked, everyone was like, "Oh my god, this looks amazing!" Because the unitards give you that sort of almost 3D AI feeling of bodies and computer generated and all that sort of stuff, and so it was really interesting to. Yeah, it was a fascinating scientific design exercise.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's so crazy. I did not know it went.
And I'm so glad. And once they saw, and so they did take that moment at the very end of the sketch, and they pull back, and you actually change the lights instantly, and you see it was completely made up in terms of its color.
Yeah, that's always, that's the reason why SNL holds you, because those moments where you can also see who's running off very quickly. You get to watch all of those wonderful moments. I'm happy that there's a full circle appreciation of everything, because without that, you don't, the viewer, you really don't get to know all of those nuances, and you kind of gasp. You're like, what the heck? Am I seeing something wrong? What just happened there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing, like you were saying, that is one of the most incredible, magical, wonderful things about working at Saturday Night Live is the live aspect. And to be able to show people in real time sometimes that it is live and it is happening as we speak.
Yeah, that's one of the things I do. It breaks my heart every time we don't get the countdown where you get the 5 minute, 3 seconds. Because as a viewer, that's when you got to, as a kid, you have to run to the TV and you have to sit down immediately. That's your call to get it together places.
Yes.
What other? Oh, I love the Megan. Of course, the Megan one. So that one, I mean, you're just making a replica of the.
Oh my God, that was and then had to do the gay Megan one. Yes, and transform it into the the gay Megan. That was really good. Yeah. And also the last sketch too, I loved, which was the Sharon Stone as the sort of the mother to the Audrey's femme fatale who was killing. And the thing I loved about the episode was that it really is true variety. You have a 1940s film noir sketch, then you have this Avatar sketch, then you have Megan, and then you have Black Lotus, which is the black version of the White Lotus and all that sort of stuff. And I forget some of the other sketches, but it really did showcase a wide variety of what it means, I think, for the category, which is variety, in what we have to do each week.
And I appreciate that each one of those individually has, like you mentioned, different framing. So when you have to do something full length, if it's, a robe or this, you're getting a different angle because it's a movie. So it's a different angle versus, sketches that are going to feel more digital or more even eras. So, our pop culture stuff is framed in a lot different kind of aspect ratio than an old school kind of long lens version of things.
Yes. And that's the I think that's the interesting part of the show too, is that is part of the conversation per week as to what this sketch also, sometimes it's straightforward and presentational. Sometimes we are changing the aspect ratio. Sometimes, there was, I think, another in that sketch, there was a commercial. And so that you were shooting back and forth between that reality, the reality of commercial and backstage, and then the director coming on to stage, and it would be flipped to present and then back to video. And so that play with all of that sort of stuff on the show is super interesting. And those are conversations which we have to have so we understand and all of that as well.
Where are all the costumes? There's so many, and I'm sure you have to reuse stuff, or where are they all? Are they stored away?
They're sort of they're over the years, we've sort of gotten them to kind of finally be in more or less 2 different places. So we have each cast has each cast member has a closet. So in that closet is the certain things that they wear every week for the most part. Guys have a couple suits and some shirts and some jeans and khakis and shoes and that sort of stuff. But for the most part, there's a warehouse in Brooklyn, which has after each cast member leaves, their items get boxed up and put into a box and archived and photographed and everything, and then sent off to this warehouse, along with a bunch of other things. There's a bunch of other, there's Letterman jackets and mascot costumes, and they're sort of the costumes that we don't or wouldn't necessarily need at any given moment, like the Barry Gibb and Andy
Keeps
Gibb.
coming back.
Those two, exactly. But those two are in a specific box that says Barry Gibb Talk Show, and we have the pictures and all that sort of stuff. Those things are stored in the warehouse in Brooklyn. We have a warehouse on where the studio is on the 8th floor, and on the 9th floor, there's a space. It's probably maybe 3,000 square feet of costume extravaganza. It's all things that, there's contemporary suits and contemporary shirts and women's dresses. And then there's all sections of other stuff you wouldn't even like. You sort of go, oh, here's a section we call artwear. Here's a section we call evening dresses. Here's a section, and then you go, here's the ethnic section. And here it's broken down like Western, costumes and that sort of stuff. So it's basically you can just sort of walk down the aisle and go, oh, right, here's the Western part. Oh, wait, I'm in Copland right here. Oh, these are where the chefs are. And now I'll go into the 80s section. And so everything is sort of broken down and you sort of walk through it. And it's beautifully organized. We have some really great people. And it's one of my favorite places to take people because it is, it's Magic Land, like any place. It's like you sort of go, oh my God, look at this place. Now, of course, you go, there's so many clothes. Why do you have to go out shopping every week? And then you're like, well, because everything is specific.
Right.
And so some things we pull a lot, and particularly during COVID and when the chain, supply chains were not producing as many clothes and we weren't getting as much inventory and things, we would have to rely on our stock a lot more and to create things. But you'd be surprised, even with all of those clothes, you still need to go.
Yeah, because you're like, this character is stuck in this era. And you could go to the 80s and grab those jeans, but it says it's a different story if that's what they bought at that time.
Correct.
I feel like this should be, they do those Vogue questions. This is what I want. I want the Vogue retrospective behind the scenes. I want them to walk through this. I want you to break everything. I want a whole documentary. For 50th, I just want a whole documentary of
Yeah.
Come on down. I'm happy to do it. Yeah.
Sounds like a dream.
It was funny because Danny Glicker is doing the Saturday Night Live movie. And so I know
Danny.
So he called me. Yeah. And so he called me the other day and was like, okay, I have just two random weird questions. Do you have any archives from that period? And I was like, Danny, that's 1975. We do have archives. We do have a few things here and there. And particularly from that era, we didn't really start heavily archiving until about, I would say, late 90s. Before that, the show was very like, whatever, it's temporary. Is it going to make it? And so the way in which a lot of things were kept, they just wrote the name in it. And they knew every week to pull that or whatever. And a lot of the clothes were borrowed at the beginning and such. But we started realizing that, it was probably going to be important at some point, maybe to start taking care of these clothes. And at least, some of these amazing characters these people were creating, they needed to be preserved. And so, every now and then I'll look through a box and a random thing will be like, oh, wait, I think that's Nora Dunn's hat. I've seen it in the hallway upstairs as I walk through from that talk show. Oh my God, that's that hat. And then, it's just random stuff like that. Most of the stuff has truly been whatever was around has been now put into a real box, but every now and then you find something that has someone's name in it. If you dig hard enough,
and we hear them from both sides. We hear, costume designers that thought they could, save stuff with a studio and then it got sold off or whatever. And then we hear celebrities. Eddie Murphy always tells stories about like, I guess wardrobe they didn't think about the celebrity being able to walk out. So they're doing the show and then walking off in the wardrobe because Eddie Murphy, somebody asked him where his like outfits were. He was like, oh yeah, we wore it to the club. It got destroyed. I wore it out. It's gone now.
Yeah, it is. And, I think I have some stuff from 30 Rock that the same sort of thing. I didn't know where I was going or anything. And I was like, I don't know where this is going, and this can't be destroyed. I don't want this destroyed. So, I have a little archive of my own.
So smart.
So,
we need an exhibit. Yes. Yeah. We need an exhibit to see everything that you've done.
All right. Okay. Although sometimes, you know how that is. Sometimes you make it because you have 36 hours to make it. And is it museum ready? Well, no, it's not couture. Well, I mean, it is couture and because it all is handmade and it's made, as fast and beautifully. And, also the difference is it has to last for 10 minutes, and then we can repair it if something goes wrong between dress rehearsal and the live show and beads start falling off or it breaks or whatever. We do have the luxury of having the ability to repair it and such. But we're not spending 30 weeks making a beautiful garment that should, be at the Met. I know, exactly. We do have our own version.
Marie, do you want to do some Mean Girls questions before you wrap up?
Yeah, let's do a couple. I know we've talked about Mean Girls before, but just since it's a different audience. But how, Mean Girls was already like established. They had the original movie. It was like iconic costume. So how did you approach that? Were you worried at all about, upsetting people or whatever?
100%. Yes, I was. I think it is interesting because I think I approached it, and maybe I approached it with too much naivete in terms of the anxiety of iconography, because this was always supposed to be 2024. There was never, we weren't ever, and I mean, I'm going to sort of backtrack a little bit in answering this question. There was a period a couple of weeks ago where I was thinking in terms of Mean Girls and its iconography and its and I will use this word nostalgia for the original. And so I was thinking a lot about this idea of nostalgia and how it, with anything, sometimes I think gets in our way. Because the thing about nostalgia is that it allows us to live in the past. And it allows us, the thing we like about nostalgia is that it's nice and warm and fuzzy and it feels good. And it reminds us of something in our past that we liked. And it doesn't confront us and it doesn't make us push our ideas or thought process further, which is what the future does, right? The future is scary because it is unknown, and the unknown is something that is scary. It's scary to think about what that future is. And I think as a designer, that blank white page, which is the future, is scary, and it's scary to engage, and it's scary to figure out what that is, because you have the nostalgia and the iconography of that past hitting you in the face in your blank page. Now, sometimes you work on a project and you don't have the nostalgia for the project because there's no, the project is completely 100% new and there's nothing you can, there's nothing to hold on to per se. So I think one of the things with Mean Girls was how to balance that nostalgia and the desire to hold on to some of what that past was, but also then to take that and to push it to 2024 while not alienating the desire for some nostalgia. Yes. If that makes sense. And so that was one of the things I think that we wrestled with all the time on the show is like how to both embrace the desire for the comfort of this nostalgia and to have these characters, which we know because they are named this, if they were named different characters, then it maybe would have been slightly easier. If they were their cousins or something and they had slightly, I don't know, if instead of Regina, her name would have been Renee, it might have been slightly easier because you're not bringing Regina to the table. the big difference also was that these are all different actors, and actors bring something to the role no matter what, you know? And so this was Renee Rapp's Regina in 2024, not Rachel McAdams' Regina in 2004. And so there's space for both of those, and they both come because they have the same name, Regina, and there's similarities to them and their desires and their wants and their wishes, but they're different people, and the world is in a different place in 2024 than it is in 2004. And so to make sure that was something we wanted really to reinforce, that this is the world of 2024 and it's life in 2024, and we are different, and everything about life now is different. So you can still have the beauty of the nostalgia of the original and all that sort of stuff, but then you also have to understand that a 16-year-old girl now has the beautiful option to have both. She has the original and the new, and can bounce back and forth between the two. And you don't have to say one is better than the other. Both can exist in the same universe. You know, one day I like an apple, the next day I like a pear. And so I like them both, and I can have them both. And that's the beautiful part about life.
Yeah.
I don't have to say I like one more than the other, although we do. We tend to as humans, because that's just what we want to do. We want to compare something as a way of understanding it. But at the same time, we can live in a space where both exist.
Yeah. And quite frankly, it would have been boring if it was an exact replica, you know, like,
100%.
Boring.
Exactly.
We can't do that. Come on, we got to shake things up.
No, exactly.
One thing that I feel that you did, like, taps into both nostalgia and like moving forward, and is a throwback, and is something specifically this podcast that Blair and I love, because we love accessories and we love a nameplate necklace. That's like signature for both of us, is how you did it in this movie. You know, like there's multiple ones, but you know, we have Damien wears one, which, like, you know, that's awesome to see it, you know, on a guy. And then the reverse one, you know, the Karen's reverse. The like, the, you know, how in the original, for anyone who hasn't seen it, or the new one, Karen, there's that scene where she bedazzles or puts like the decal of the K and it's backwards in the mirror. And you know, Tom, you put like those funny Easter eggs in there.
Right. And I will say this, she actually didn't, I love Ivanka, because she didn't actually, the first time I put it in her room, I didn't say anything about how to put it on or any of that sort of stuff. And she actually did put it on backwards. I wanted her to put it on backwards. She didn't say anything. I went into her room to make sure she was okay. And I was like, okay. Maybe you're closer to this character than I thought you were.
You look in the mirror, it's
method acting.
That's why everyone loves that character, because there are moments where you look in the mirror and you put it on, and then you go, something doesn't feel right, but I'm going to go out the door anyway. It feels okay.
Yes. Crazy.
So brilliant.
Yeah.
I know we're running out of time. We want to be mindful.
It's all right. I can keep talking.
Okay. Do you want to do another Mean Girls question, or is there any that we want to fit in? I guess just, you know, more about Gen Z, and like, I know that you study the way that they shop, like through, you know, Instagram and stuff, but how else did you get inspiration?
Right.
Like, was it all social media? Did you tap any teenagers to tell you what's in?
Well, I did. So I do, you know, I tapped into, I have a bunch of friends of mine who have 15 and 16-year-old kids. And so they go to school here in New York. And I also have a niece who was a senior at the time in high school in Indiana. So Mean Girls takes place in the next state over, Illinois, and it is interesting because this was something that happened on the movie sometimes, is that every now and then an adult would say, I don't know about that. And I would have to either say, well, talk to your daughter or take a picture and see what they say about it, because you're bringing your 50-year-old parent eyes to look at this 16-year-old high school student, and it may not be right for you, but it speaks to someone who is 16 years old, not to the 50-year-old parent. And it didn't happen that often, but, some of the people, I had some really amazing people that I worked with, and we had like 4 of our PAs in the costume shop, in the costume department, were 22, 23, 24. And so every now and then I'd have a little bit of a question sometimes or whatever, or they'd see one of the characters and was like, oh my God, that looks so good. I love the way that looks. Or they would come in and I'd be like, okay, I love your outfit. Where'd you get it? And so closer in age to what these high school students were supposed to be. So I was, would try and tap into them as well. And, it is that weird sort of thing too. It's like the reason the mall scene was written out of this particular version was because teenagers tend not to shop in malls anymore.
Yeah.
And so it was very important for the directors, because we had a conversation about it. She goes, and they were like, well, we've cut that mall scene because teenagers don't go to malls anymore. They travel in packs, and they still go to,
they go to hang.
That sort of stuff. Exactly. They go to hang. They don't go to shop, because they just look at it on Instagram or some social media aspect or their computer, and that's how they engage the world.
Yeah, it's delivered to their door versus carrying bags. There was a status symbol of carrying the bags through the mall or having the money to get the things like knowing I could get this, but I'm going to go myself and hold the bag and have the experience. It's not the same. They'll go to the mall and hang. Food court is popping, but they're holding bags to them is almost like, let's take this to the car and get this out of our hands, because we're not used to it.
100%, because that the phone is for your hand. Yeah, I know. You're talking to someone who goes to through a department store and feels everything.
Yeah,
because for me, clothing is such a tactile thing. It's like how it feels. That's the other part about clothing. Clothing is emotional that way, and how it reflects just kind of the way we exist in this world. And so to not be able to look at something and hold it up and see it and touch it and feel it and sort of go, oh, how's this going to move when I want, or is this going to move, or that sort of stuff, is just a completely foreign thing to me.
Yeah. If they could bottle the smells and textures of each individual store, I'd be the number one.
Yes.
That would be my favorite candle perfume, because it's one of the things where both of us will do a mall just because it's what, it's what we know. And it's so wild. They shop online like that. It's so wild.
I know. It's crazy. But and unfortunately, the way in the world has come is that you get sometimes you can find more interesting things online.
Yeah, it's true.
But you don't get that rush of digging through clothes and sweeping the rack and then finding that, you don't get that rush. It feels like an Indiana Jones level of finding an artifact and having it for yourself.
I want to go shopping with you, because that's exactly the way. That is my journey through a department store as well. And one day it can be, and this is one of the things I always say too, is that you can go to the same place over and over, but the world will show you the thing you need to see at that particular moment. Like you can go through the rack of clothes on a Monday and then a Wednesday and a Friday, and you will see something
Yes.
different each time you go through that rack, even though you're going through the same rack. Because at that particular moment, you may be so laser focused in like, this is what I need. And this is the only thing I can see. And I'm just narrowing down on that, you know, as opposed to another time, like say on Wednesday, it's like, I just need, like, let me just go and look. And then all of a sudden you see all of this other new stuff
That's
that was
the
there
best
on
question.
Monday. But
That's
you
the best
couldn't
when you're
see
like,
it.
did you guys just put this out? And they're like, no, that's been there forever. And you're like,
Yes.
what was I? Then you're excited again. Then it's throw it all in the
Yes.
basket. It's the dopamine. Children, you don't even need
100%.
drugs. You
Yes.
just need to
Yes.
go to the mall.
Yes.
It's the best feeling. You guys don't understand.
Exactly.
It's wonderful. The prices change. Everything changes. It's a wonderful feeling.
Yes. Yep.
Bring back
Agreed.
malls.
Agreed. Yeah.
So Tom, are there any other like projects or anything that you're working on, even personal things or anything
I'm working.
inspiring you?
I am trying to get inspired. I try and inspire myself every day, but sometimes it's hard. I am working on a couple other things. Actually, I did start a new small little movie tomorrow. I kind of started it last week. So it's a very small independent movie that we're shooting in New York. And it's I can't really say who the director is, but it's her first film. And it's going to be it's a beautiful story of a 94-year-old grandmother type figure and a 20-year-old college student who begins to write a story of her life. And it's a beautiful story that takes place in New York, kind of about who can tell someone else's story. As we age and we die and the stories die with you, how do you carry that story on of your friend or your loved one? Or, we incorporate these stories and we tell each other stories, even with friends, and they don't have to die or any of that sort of stuff. But as we become friends with people, we begin to sort of incorporate some of their stories into our own stories, and who has that story, who owns that story. So it's a nice little film. And then I'm working on an opera that's going to I'm going to have my New York Metropolitan Opera debut in September.
Congratulations.
So, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, talk about theater. Now this is the most
I know,
drama.
and this one is, I do have to say it. And although it's a really great story, part of the clothes are super interesting. The other part are just sort of, it takes place on an Air Force base in 2008. So there's a lot of Air Force, but it's all these LED screens and we're flying half the chorus. And then like, there's a whole other chorus, which is they represent the history of war through mankind, and there are sort of abstract uniforms that are kind of uniforms. So what we ended up doing was, we didn't want to be able to pinpoint any kind of specific, that's the uniform from 1912. Oh, that's a uniform for 1860. That's a uniform for 1940. So we had to abstract them all to just sort of say, what is the iconography of wartime soldier? And then what we ended up doing, we bought across the country all of these used and worn military uniforms in canvas bags. And so we ripped them all apart, used them as fabric, then put them back together in different shapes and different sizes, and then on top of them. And so they're sort of like ghosts, military ghosts.
It's an amalgamation of anything that from a tactile perspective would feel military, but not saying this war specifically.
Yes. Correct.
Which could be triggering
Correct.
for some.
Yes. Yeah, and exactly, and like one of the back of the coats is a duffel bag that has the front part of the duffel bag with the person's ID number and name, and the handles that they use, and it's just like that's the back of the coat. You know, the front part is made out of a blanket and another. So it's sort of how I took all of these like elements of from 1890 to 1970 and just rip them apart and then put them back together.
That's wonderful.
Wow, it's brilliant.
It is
brilliant, but it took me. It took me a moment. I do have to say, so it did take me. That was the one. The other part was sort of straightforward, but that did. It took me about 7 months to finally figure out what and how to do that. And it's that thing, as I say, you stare at that blank page and it can be daunting. And so that I would go back and I would sort of read it, look at that, and I'd look at the words and I'd just be like, okay, not today. That's not gonna, the words aren't coming, not computing. And then literally one day I was walking down the street and went, got it. Now I know what to do. And it just like, you have those moments. It's like being in a fitting with an actor where all of a sudden you put this on and that, and then the necklace makes everything make sense. And you're like, got it. Yeah. There's my character.
That's a hard, we talked about perspective before, but that's a different, you're not getting the close-ups. You're not getting, you have to be able to convey and resonate with an audience from hundreds of feet back for depending on.
Correct. And exactly. And that became, and that was, and is one of the big conversations, is because you have the stage and then you have the orchestra pit. So you have, and then you have the seats in the audience. So you're
me back here in the cheap seats.
the distance to finally get to a face or a person. What does that look like, and how does that silhouette become super, super important?
I'm very excited.
Wow.
Yeah.
So cool. Yeah. But we'll be keeping our eyes peeled for both those. And of course, watching SNL.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you so much, Tom. It was so wonderful speaking with you. Please come back anytime.
Please
just call me. I'll come every week.
This was everything. She sold us the dream at the beginning, and it paid. We got psychology. We had fun times. We were a sketch comedy mess. This was wonderful. And then we got the opera at the end. This was just all off coffee.
There you go.
This episode was just brought to you by Cold Brew.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, because we know it's been a long week. So thank you.
Okay.